My name is Claire Speed, and on behalf of the Glenn Gould Foundation, I'm delighted to welcome you to the fifth and final day of the Promise of Music Forum. Today also happens to be World Mental Health Day, so it is especially fitting that this session will focus on music's impact on youth mental health. The Glenn Gould Foundation honors Gould's spirit and legacy as a musician, writer, communicator, and thinker through the biennial Glenn Gould Prize and through programs such as The Promise of Music, which celebrates music and the arts as transformative forces in society. Our keynote speakers in this illuminating talk titled Why Music Matters for Youth Mental Health will explore music's scientifically validated power to heal, to connect, and to enable youth to thrive. A powerful example of this could be seen last night in the performance by the Jerusalem Youth Chorus, a choir made up of young people from Palestine and Israel. Through weekly rehearsals that combine music making and facilitated dialogue, these remarkable young people find healing and connection, a necessity in a world so often marked by division and conflict. This session brings together two extraordinary voices offering complementary perspectives on music's transformative effect on young lives. Dr. Marco Battaglia draws from clinical psychiatry and evidence-based research, while Dr. Wendy Stewart approaches the world from pediatric neurology, exploring the role of music in activating synapses and dopamine responses and supporting healthy brain development. Rooted in science, yet elevated by deep compassion and rich personal experience, both speakers offer a powerful and hopeful vision of what music can do. Our host and moderator is Dr. Ellen Waterman, professor and Helmut Kallmann Chair for Music in Canada at Carleton University in Ottawa. Her interdisciplinary research in music and sound studies engages with improvisation, community-engaged research creation, deaf and disability-led music, and participatory sonic arts for social change. She's also a flutist and vocalist, specializing in creative improvisation, and is the founder and director of the Research Center for Music, Sound, and Society in Canada, dedicated to exploring the complex and diverse roles that music and sonic arts play in shaping Canadian society. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Ellen Waterman and our keynote speakers, Dr. Marco Battaglia and Dr. Wendy Stewart.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you to the Glenn Gould Foundation for what has been the most stimulating week. I'm sure you all agree if you've been able to come to some of these presentations. My role here is very small today. I'm here to welcome our keynote speakers, Wendy Stewart and Marco Battaglia, and to help facilitate a little. They are going to present individually, and then because I think integral to your musical, to your professional worlds as people in psychology and in pediatric neurology, you are both also musicians for whom music is a central part of your lives. Is that fair to say? Something that is generative in the other research and work that you do. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Battaglia. And after the two have spoken, they're going to play for us a little bit. And I think this is a fresh meeting of musical minds, right? And then we'll hopefully have time for questions. Okay.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. So let's see if I can get the first slide. Yes. Okay, so I'd like to thank very much the organizers, Brian Levin and team. You've done an incredible thing. It's such a treat to be here and to get to learn so many things. My presentation today is actually an introduction of some concepts that hopefully will orient the general audience. I put myself in the shoes of a lay person who is listening to data And it's my aim to take them by the hand and just give them a couple of ideas, a couple of clarification how things are done in research. So I will start with a couple of questions. One is a very difficult question. The second is a rhetorical question. The difficult question is, why is it so difficult to talk about music? Sorry, went too fast. That was one. Yes. So why is it so difficult to talk about music? Frank Zappa, who was a genius, said that talking or writing about music is like dancing for architecture, implying that it's essentially impossible. It's challenging to talk about music, but maybe because music is so abstract. Music inhabits the air, and once the last note of a tune is gone, that thing is gone forever, never to be the same a second time. Even with the most clearly notated scores, next time you play it, there will be differences. A little delay, a little grace note, a little silence. It's going to be a unique experience every time. So this makes every musical experience so unique. And again, it's abstract. It's not like a picture that you can touch. So the rhetorical question is, if Ricercare a tre voci by Johann Sebastian Bach is played in a forest and no one is there to listen, shall we have music? And the answer is no, obviously, because music is ultimately a series of waves in the space. It's when these waves hit a ear and then a brain that this becomes sound and then music. Other than that, there's no music, it's just waves in the air. So to have music, we need more. Not only do we need a sender and a medium, which is again waves in the air, we need a receiver. And this receiver is an individual, a brain and a mind. So that when Johann Sebastian is kind enough to play for us his Ricercare, something happened. These waves travel through the air. They get to our brain, and they produce a lot of different things that we like to regroup in two wide families. One is cognitions, and the other is emotions. So cognition is, oh, yes, I know this tune. It's Ricercare a tre voci. And then emotion is, God, this is beautiful. But for these things to happen, we need a cascade of fairly complex things. So not only do we need waves in air that impact on the eardrums, but we need the mechanical activation of the inner ear, the molecular exchanges as synapses, a cascade of electrical micro events in the brain. Multiple brain areas are recruited, they interact, they become activated, cognitive processes, emotional processes. But the point here is that we really need that, individual, an individual, a mind, and a brain in between for this equation to work. Okay? So I will move now into similarities and differences. What happens in the brain, what happens in the people when we hear music, when we listen to music. So for sure, you can think that when you have an audience listening to the same tune exactly in the same moment, all these processes go on in the brain. Just the things, the cascade of events I just described to you. And people will tend to be similar to a good extent for these things to happen. Same parts of the brain, same kind of activation, and so on and on and on. And these are the similarities. And this is exactly what people in general psychology do. They study mean effect. But interestingly enough, we, the humans, animals as well, differ from each other, and we show individual differences. Now, over and above the average effect, you have dispersion around the mean. It's back.
Good luck.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So, in the importance of individual differences, exactly in the same moment, if you look at this picture, these children are watching exactly the same scene, exactly at the same time. They're at a puppet theater, and they're watching the same scene. But look at the faces. Look at the emotional responses. They're there in a moment, absolutely synchronous.
We'll just give you this.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Okay, so if you look at the faces, some are excited, some are frightened, some are surprised. All this to say that if we study individual differences, emotional individual differences, we see a lot of variation around the mean. So this mean and variation thing, let's bear in mind, because it's really important, because later on myself and more Wendy will dive into illness, psychopathology, mental, and today is the World Day of Mental Health. So in order to understand what mental health is, it's really a conversation about individual differences. So let's dive even deeper into these things. So interestingly enough, music evokes predictable, average brain responses depending on the stimuli. Dissonant notes. Notes that are difficult to grasp. Many people would describe them not as exactly pleasant, evoke predictable and similar waves, electric waves in the brain on the average of people. By the same token, consonant notes, the chords that we usually describe as pleasant, easy, calming, evoke pretty different patterns in the brain. So again, this is about average. But then, there's no way to think about average without thinking about dispersion around the mean, which is variation. And again, bear in mind, the dispersion around the mean is what people in mental health typically care about. Interestingly enough, variation around the mean variance is where evolution works, is where natural selection works. We came where we came historically in our evolutionary trajectory because the selection worked on individual differences, not on means, amongst other things. So let's think together about a fake experiment. Let's suppose you're given a lot of money to do a very silly experiment. You're going to ask a question: why is it that a song, I chose this song by Chartres La Mer, slightly silly, one of the reasons why I love it. So we try to address the question, why is it that when we listen to white noise as compared to this lovely, silly song, the brain shows reactions, okay? And to do that, because we're given an awful lot of money, we do a PET scan, so we study the metabolism of different parts of the brain. We have 1,000 subjects, which is a huge population for these studies. We have chunks of their DNA, genes for which people differ from each other. We have environmental measures. How was the upbringing? What did you experience in your life? And we have it's a world record. No, it's back. Okay. So you do the study. You never do the study because it's silly. No one will give you the money for this. But I can easily predict the results. The results are quite likely that the overall activation of the brain to the song as compared to white noise will be higher. You will see quite likely a moderate between 0.15 and 0.30 correlation between some regions of interest of the brain to be activated and some mood, temperament, personality scales. So to some extent, you can predict the amount of activation in some areas of the brain depending on the mood, anxiety, or disposition of the person. You will quite likely see small but significant contribution of genes, polymorphic genes, genes for which we differ from each other, and quite likely you will see significant association with environmental things such as your upbringing or your life experiences. So you get to explain in this inferential approach some of the things that happen in the brain while you're listening to music. Now, the question is, have we found the why? It could be argued that we have provided a description of what is going on into the brain at a deeper layer. But for many reasons, I would probably not say that we have found the why. Again, we have mapped, and this is very important, it's very interesting. We have mapped things that happen in the brain while we are doing these things, while we are listening to music, while we are experiencing emotions. But I have some difficulties in saying that this is the why. These are correlations, okay? And I'll extend more into these things in a minute. So, more on individual differences, covariance and causation. What are these things? As I mentioned to you, suppose you plot, because you've done this experiment, the amount of brain activation to music and some temperamental variables, and quite likely, because I said to you how the experiment will end, you'll find this nice, cloud of correlations, which essentially tells you, look, to some extent, you can predict the amount of brain activation depending on a person's genetic setup, temperament, anxiety, upbringing. Will you be able to explain the entirety of it? No, never, because of many reasons. One is error of measurement, but not only that. Just because any of these approaches, which is really interesting, the kind of stuff I've done for many, many years, and I really had a lot of intellectual fun in doing that. But you have to be aware that one, we're looking at individual differences, not at mean effects. Two, we'll be able, in the best scenario, able to explain part of the variance, but a big chunk will never be explained. And third, we're doing this under a very specific set of rules, tenets, that sometimes can be, falsified, and some other times, no, we just really can't falsify them. But this is interesting because these variation around the mean, which is variance, can be decomposed. And the graph is just meant to signal to you that it can be decomposed into a genetic variance, environmental variance, and this is nice. This is interesting because it tells us how experiences interact or relate to our genetic setup. But again, we are modeling, we are mapping. If you like to think that this is explanatory in terms of causes, please be my guest. But please be aware that these are correlation. So these are estimates of the amount of shared variance. Full stop. Nothing less, nothing more. This brings me to two important categories of explaining in psychopathology. It's called explaining versus understanding. And you can explain or try to understand people's behavior, mental illness, and you can try and explain or understand music. So understanding is essentially sharing empathically a human experience and grasping the subjective, meaningful connections. A lot of words. If you like the word holistic, which I abhor, you can use it. It's a sort of holistic approach to people and things. It's very useful clinically. It's something all clinicians use. So I'm not denying that. And I'm trying to symbolize it here with this beautiful sculpture. This was found in the Sea of Southern Italy a few years ago. It's called the Dancing Satire. And I think the sculpture tried to grasp the emotional experience of dancing. So I think it's a good example of understanding. And it can be, of course, put in a contrast with explaining, which is the experiment we faked a few minutes ago. One other important thing to be borne in mind is that in understanding, the individual is at the center of the picture. In explaining, the individual is part of a sample. Results might be informative of the person. It's not given for granted. We're great in describing what happens in large number of people when we use the scientific method. But to drive from there into the individual in front of you, I don't think we're yet there. So the paradox is, whatever the approach, we seem to have insufficient power to fully describe the complex subjective experience of music. You can do it. Oh, time already? 5 minutes? 5 minutes. Lovely, thanks. Whatever we use, we are short of power with either method. But it's fascinating to bear in mind that spoken language and rhythm emerge from the same genetic background. So at some point in our evolutionary trajectory, genes emerged that drive human ability to speak and understand speech and to recognize rhythm. So they stem out from the same genetic background, and evolution drove this thing. It also tells us that some genetic variants do a double shift, double job. They serve different masters, if you wish. And we just have 20,000 functional genes that are not very many. So my point is, when we look at these complex phenotypes, be it diabetes, mental illness, many forms of cancer, metabolic illnesses, it's always the same story. We have a multifactorial condition. Individual differences are extremely important. The causal architecture is mixed. It's partially genetics, partially environmental. Each actor plays a very little role, typically explaining 1% or less of the total variance. They act additively. Sometimes they interact, they potentiate each other, in other words. So any kind of therapy we use, be it speech therapy, drug therapy, music, it's always the same story. Nothing will be bad enough to ruin our life. Nothing will be strong enough to solve the problem. It's multifaceted. This needs to be borne in mind. But it's surely part of the process that music is important to become more aware of ourselves, of our feelings. Yeah? The earlier we start, the better it is. Which brings us to the end of my presentation, and I'd like to end up with a light note. It's about a 25 billion kilometers journey. In 1977, the Voyager was put into the space, and it traveled for all these years. They were the mid-70s. People were dreaming. We thought, as humans, we would change the world. We wanted to communicate. And on the Voyager, you have a golden disk. And on the golden disk, you have what people thought would be the basic to let other people understand what is important, what is essential in being humans. There are drawings of human figures, a representation of the solar system, the double helix, and music. There is Gould playing Bach, and there are some traditional tunes as well. So I'm not sure that nowadays people would do anything like that. We have lost a little bit of faith, hope, dream abilities, but probably no one out there will ever be able to read these things. But the bottom line is people think, for very good reasons, that without music, it's impossible to communicate what humans are at their very root. And it's so lovely that they did it. And maybe one day someone will listen to this. And that's it. Thank you very much.
That's a good question. I think it's up. Hello? Oh, here we go. It's up. Thank you. Thank you very much, Marco. You had me thinking about my daughter's absolute love of metal music, and especially really dark, thrashy metal music when she was a young teenager, and how absolutely soothing that was for her, and how important it was to her mental health, right? So this idea that there are so many variations is so important. We'll move things over to Wendy Stewart. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ellen. So I really want to take you on a little bit of a journey and to help you think about how we might take everything we've learned and apply it to youth mental health. And I think you've learned in some of the other sessions that music really is a universal experience. And the interesting part is if you look at some of the literature, if I were to play one tune for all of us, some of us might find it soothing, and other people might find it grating, because we all have these personal preferences that Marco has alluded to. What I find really fascinating is I play my accordion in nursing homes, and the music that really brings people to life and has had the biggest imprint in their brain is the music from their teens and 20s. And I want to just draw on that today as we talk about it, because I mean, I'm definitely a 70s and 80s babe, and so ABBA and Eurythmics and things like that were definitely things that got me going. So I want to get you reflecting on that as we go through this, and I want to help you understand some of the pathways in the brain that are important that might help us think about how we can encourage youth. You've probably seen in lots of the other presentations that music is the one thing that activates pretty well most of the brain. It's pretty remarkable. And as we've developed the skills to actually see what's happening in terms of the brain that's lighting up in some of the functional MRI studies and PET studies that we can do, it's pretty amazing. And I'll come back to this at the end before we start to play some music. So the thing about music is it also activates things around our emotions. You can feel anything with music. It can give you goosebumps. It can do all of that. And we'll think about why that is. So one of the big things in music, and also other things that we do, is our reward system in our brain. And dopamine is the key neurotransmitter that gets released when we get that little buzz and we feel good. So when you're on social media and you get a like, we get a little dopamine buzz, and that's what the people that plan all these things utilize, because we can get that little buzz and reward that make us want to keep going. And so when you think about the reward system in the brain, you can think of things like chocolate, you can think of love, and music is definitely up there. And what you're doing is you're activating the parts of the brain called the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental gray matter. And then you'll see on the right-hand side, you get that pleasure, but also the desire to do more. And so you can really use that to motivate people and to get them to do things. You've heard in other presentations as well that this is not just about what we eat or what we do, but it can also help with other things as well when we listen to music. So it can, whoops. How do I go back? Do I Oh, it's not showing the whole slide. That's okay. So what it does is it can activate our autonomic nervous system, which is the automatic parts of our brain that control our heart rate, our blood pressure, our breathing, things that we don't have to think about. And so you can use music to actually impact those parts of our brain. And that's important when it comes to our stress responses as well. It can also affect our hormones. So these are everything that control all the cells of our body. And you've heard in other presentations, if you've been here all week, that it can also help with pain. And so when people have been involved in music programs, sometimes their tolerance for their pain can change, and it can really help them get on with their life. And the other big one that we've heard a lot about is the motor response. And we're going to do something with that later when we play some music. Now, apart from the reward system, the other big one is our stress response. And so when we're exposed to something that we might perceive as a threat, what happens is our hypothalamus, which is in our brain at the top, releases something called corticotropin-releasing hormone. And that tells our pituitary to produce ACTH, which is adrenocorticotropin hormone. And that then acts on our adrenal gland to release cortisol. And cortisol is our primary stress hormone. And so what it does is it releases glucose from the liver to give us energy. It also increases our heart rate and blood pressure because you also get in conjunction with that adrenaline or epinephrine. And so we're ready to run or fight. So that's our fight or flight response. But even other things that make us feel stressed can do that as well. And so what happens with music, though, is we can actually influence that stress response because music can lower our cortisol level. It can actually synchronize with the heart rate and calm it. And so for some music, depending on what you like, you can actually calm your stress response and actually settle. And that's important when it comes to youth. The other thing that music does is it really creates opportunities for social bonding. So another chemical that gets released when we do things together with music, so singing or playing instruments, is we produce oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone. And so that synchrony can foster unity and interaction with one another. And Laurel Traynor was just talking about that in the session I was at before this. So why does all this matter, and why am I telling you all this? Well, when we think about our youth, we're really quite concerned about the level of mental health concerns that we're seeing in youth. And certainly in my practice, I'm seeing a lot of youth struggling. And there's lots of different reasons for that. And I just want to highlight some of them. But some of them are feeling very lonely. That's been highlighted in a number of different studies. They feel a lack of social support. There's poverty, of course, and where I live, there's a high level of poverty in some of our communities. A social inequality that exists, future uncertainty, even thinking about our planet can really make some kids very anxious. And then they worry about academic pressures as well. And then all of the mental health concerns that they're experiencing and high levels of anxiety. And I'm certainly seeing more anxiety. I never see one thing anymore in my practice. I see these layers of things that children are struggling with. And the other thing, of course, is screens and all of the things that go along with that. And I do worry that kids are being exposed to screens to the exclusion of things that can really build resilience and help them with their mental health. They spend a lot of time, and what that does is it actually displaces that opportunity for in-person engagement. How do you learn to cope with conflict? How do you learn to deal with something, to read body language, to understand what someone truly meant rather than seeing it written in a text or in something else on social media? And I really worry that the kids are just not building the skills to be able to do that. I really worry also, I see this a lot in my practice, things around things like cyberbullying. And the biggest thing too is that the kids are never away from any of this. It's constant. They don't get enough sleep because they're on their phones, or the phone is keeping them awake because of the blue light that's emitted from the screen, and they don't change it to night mode. So you can all appreciate that if you've been lacking sleep, if you have anxiety, that just heightens it. It's like it's amplified if you're lacking sleep. The other thing we all do is we compare ourselves with one another, and youth particularly do that. They actually wonder if they're as good as somebody else and look for the number of likes they have and all those kind of things. My other concern is that even when kids are together, they're not really together. They're actually on their electronics as well. I say this partly facetiously, but even in my office, the kids almost can't not look at their phone. And sometimes I'm tempted to say, do you want me to text you my questions? And it's because they're just so addicted to having it in their hand and connecting with it. Now, the other thing about youth, and this is what I want to allude to when I was thinking about music earlier and what brings people to life, is that when you're a teenager in early 20s, you're really at a point where you're very sensitized to your reward system. And your peers really amplify that as well. Many years ago, I read a study about youth driving, and everyone thinks that youth are terrible drivers. They're actually not. They're as good as adults as long as there's no peers around, which I thought was really fascinating, because they'll take more risks and do more things that are risky if they have their peers with them. And this is felt to be due to the fact that they have a mature reward system, but their frontal lobe isn't fully developed. So they don't have that prefrontal control that helps them with those impulses and that little buzz that they get. So when we think about all of that, how can we then take music and consider how we might do it? What we're really looking for is how do we help people be together and learn to read one another, to deal with the conflict and cope with things that come their way. So I really believe, obviously I'm biased, but I really believe music can be a part of this. It can be done both passively and actively. So you can teach and get your youth and students to actually think about music that helps them cope with their emotions. Perhaps it's a way of exploring themselves with the lyrics or the genre of the music. It's really a great way, a safe space to allow you to express what you're feeling and to find ways to connect with one another. Maybe you share playlists or do something together with one another. I was involved in a really great study about songwriting, but more than that, though, I think you can do things like be together, connecting with one another. That is so important for us to be able to develop our own self-esteem and feel supported and valued. And having that group support in music can be so effective. Just listening to one another, being able to actually be present to one another can be very powerful. And then being able to persevere. If you're in music training, I meet a lot of kids who just won't do anything. They'll try it once. If they can't get it, they just give up. And music training can really give you that sense of perseverance and then also the pride that you get from being able to accomplish something. So I love being able to see kids take something on like that and continue with it. I was so proud of Sistema when I was at the concert on Wednesday night, both Toronto and New Brunswick, and just to see what those youth have done. And if any of you get the chance to see the youth in action, please take it. The other project I was involved in was songwriting. And songwriting is really a powerful way for youth to express themselves, to be able to share their project with one another and have the pride in the fact of something they created. And they were able to express painful experiences that they had with one another in a way that they probably couldn't have done with words. Sometimes it was just instrumental music, other times it was with words as well, or sometimes even rap. But the key was to give them that space to be creative themselves. So I want to encourage you to think about how you could integrate this into your own work. And I think, when we think of music, one of the things you can do is encourage them to consider playlists that might help with their mood regulation. Provide opportunities for them to consider how they might write lyrics or songs as a way to process difficult situations and be present to the emotions that they feel around them. Engage in activities with other people, either singing or playing musical instruments that could help build trust and connection with one another. and then really normalizing music as a healthy coping tool. But the other thing I think is really important for us all to remember, and this has come up again and again, is we have to meet the youth where they're at. If they're struggling, then we need to see what would be helpful to them. I was very taken with the presentation on social prescribing because I really loved that it wasn't what's the matter with you, it's what matters to you. And I just want to remember that so much because it really reflects a lot of what I believe in terms of what we should be doing with our kids. How am I doing for time? 18 minutes left. So, okay. So maybe just to kind of pull it all together, music in all its forms has the capacity to lower stress, boost mood, and this is particularly helpful for youth when often they're struggling with their emotions, with their peer interactions sometimes. It's a safe space to express their feelings and for them to connect and have a sense of belonging. I really think one of the things I've really learned this week, and even though I knew this, it's brought it home to me, is that we have to meet kids culturally where they're at as well, and to really understand what kind of music means something to them. And so I'm certainly going to think about that as I go forward. And the other thing is, it needs to be non-threatening. It can be hard to get youth to continue to stay with something. I've been involved with youth groups and things like that, and it can be hard to get kids to come consistently, so there has to be something that just draws them in. And often having peers that are really into it, or mentors that are close peers, can be so helpful to get them to stay with it. I want you to think about what songs move you, what you remember and what really gets you in the groove, so to speak. I can't tell you enough that I really see music as a whole brain workout. And I hope you'll see when we come to play some music for you that it really is a wonderful way to show all the different parts of the brain. So I'm going to just highlight some of that here. So if you think about the corpus callosum, that's the little red triangle there, that joins the different halves of the brain from side to side. And you can see the primary motor cortex is shown there on the left. And then you've got the primary sensory cortex. You've got your ability to hear, so your receptive language in the posterior temporal area. You've got your frontal lobe, which is actually adjusting and judging things and making decisions, but also your frontal eye fields are in the frontal lobe as well. And so I'm going to tell you why I'm showing you all this. This is your auditory cortex. And then you've got your occipital lobe, which processes visual information. And then your cerebellum, which is involved in movement. So when I'm playing the accordion, I'm using all these different parts of the brain for everything I do, because I'm reading the music, listening to what's going on, playing along, moving both sides of my body. And if you're involved in dance or other instruments as well, you're very much doing the same thing. Plus, you're activating your reward systems as well. And so you can appreciate that if we can teach the kids how music could be used, and music that matters to them could be used, it can be a very powerful adjunct tool to help them deal with some of the emotional dysregulation and challenges they face in the teens and early 20s. So I want to thank you for listening, and we'd be delighted now to hopefully entertain you with some music. And before we do that, I want to share that at the end, I'm going to do something that I'd love you to be a part of. So one of the things in Scotland is that when you play a jig or something like that, the audience claps along, but also claps faster, hoots and hollers. So I want to hear you do that when I come to that, so that you're a part of it. And I've got a plant in the audience that will help you all get going. So, all right. Did you want to say anything, Ellen?
Get ready. So while you get set up, I'll just maybe riff a little bit on something that I think has been in common between your two presentations, and that also links this deep scientific knowledge about music to our felt experience as music educators or musicians. And that is the difference between hearing and listening. The late, great Pauline Oliveros, wonderful musician and inventor of a philosophy called deep listening, used to really point this out. You know, as Marco pointed out, what we perceive as sound is that moment that sound pressure waves get translated into sound in the brain. But what makes it powerful is our ability to decide openly, attentively, empathetically to listen to one another. And one of the ways I think that music is powerful in that is that it draws us in and engages us in that whole brain way. But I love the way that these presentations link brain to heart, right? That without that willingness to listen to the kids that come into your practice, without that willingness to ask what matters to you and to kind of find a way to make a space for that person to express themselves in a way that's meaningful to them, we lose the ability, we close a door, we lose the ability for music to have its full effects. So I think I've riffed long enough to let you get set up. We have the Uilleann pipes and the piano accordion. Please give it up for Wendy and Marco. Wow, I think this band ought to spend some more time together. Well, we still have about 6 minutes, which is great. So we can take some questions from the audience and also maybe just giving you a chance to come back to your seats for a moment. I don't know what you observed in that, but one of the things that that I always think is amazing about music is the way that people negotiate that space between them when you're first playing together and you've just met and you've not had, you know, hours of rehearsal or anything. And earlier you were having to negotiate even things like what your instrument can do in terms of key versus what your instrument can do in terms of key, right? Yeah, so I'd just be interested to ask you about the role that your making music has in the way that you think about the scientific and medical ideas about music that you've been expressing today. What does it mean to you to actually make music as well as try to understand how it's operating on the human body?
I think for me, being a musician I certainly identify more as a musician. I was a musician before I was a physician. And for me, it encompasses everything that I believe medicine should be. And so when I think of the skills that I bring as a physician, that attentiveness, the listening, the being present, the judgments that we make, and even as we play or listen to music, or everything that we do as a physician. So for me, it's almost like I've honed my skills for doing both jobs. And I really value what music brings to my practice in that sense. Does that?
Yeah, thank you. And Marco?
Yeah, it's my safe place. It is my meditation, is my way of expressing feelings. I'll never forget, when I was a teenager, I played a little bit of guitar, and I was never encouraged by my family to play music, maybe for good reasons. But I still remember my father telling me one day, he said, "Oh, I noticed that you play more if you are very happy or when you're very sad." And I looked at it and said, yeah, you're right. It's my way of, expressing something, which is very banal. I mean, I think this can be shared by many, many people in the audience. But by the way, it's one of the reasons why when I see kids in my practice, I always ask them, do you play music? I always encourage them, stick to that. It doesn't matter how good you are. You'll probably never be recording records, but who cares? But it's going to be your space to express yourself, and it can be precious. Keep it with you. Don't give up.
So literally medicine.
I think it can be said so.
Yeah. I wonder if we have some questions from the house. Yes, and in the back, and I believe a microphone is coming your way. Great. Thank you. I appreciate the staff in this venue and all the work that the volunteers have done as well in the conference and facilitating. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Dr. Battaglia, could you just explain the instrument that you were playing? I couldn't quite make out. Is it the Julian pipes? Can you just show us how it...
Yeah, so it's called the Julian pipes. It's the Irish bagpipes. There are three essential parts. One is the chanter. You play the melody on it, and it has 2 octaves. Then you have the drones that make this sort of continuous bass note that you didn't hear because this is a set in C and I played in D, but that's another story. And then you have the regulators that are like pedals. You make simple chords. But just to encapsulate the whole thing, one of the greatest pipers, Liam O'Flynn, once said, these are the Ilian pipes. They are made of different components. Every piper every morning knows that at least one of these components won't work. What he doesn't know is exactly what won't work, but something won't work.
There's a lesson in that somewhere. We still have time for a question or two. Yes.
I grabbed the mic. So I had to step out for a moment, so forgive me if I'm asking something that you covered, but when you make music together and music in groups, I'm wondering about the sort of alignment of not only feelings, but also rhythm, and whether that relates to the mirror neurons, and also from a more subjective standpoint, emotionally, what kinds of feelings of, group participation, solidarity. And I know Wendy was talking about the feelings of isolation that coming from living your life on a handheld screen, how that can become a therapeutic process in itself.
So I was talking about the bonding that happens when you play together, and particularly if you sing in harmony or play together, there's so much happens in that interaction, but it does actually, as I mentioned, produce oxytocin in our bodies, which is our bonding hormone. And when you think of when you hold a baby, you actually produce oxytocin, and that's what you're drawn to a baby. And it's actually even the shape of the baby that can do that as well, because the head is big relatively to the body. And so I always found that really fascinating. But music can actually cause us to feel those things as well, whether we're aware of it. And so it also reduces your cortisol, which is the primary stress hormone. So there's just enjoyment and more a sense of peace, I guess, in that as well. And just the joy of actually sharing the experience is very powerful. I love playing with other people. I mean, I do sometimes play alone, but it is way more fun. And you actually activate more of the brain if you play with other people. And you already activate it a lot anyway, but if you play with other people, you activate more. And so it's a powerful tool.
Well, we're out of time, but I just want to say I feel richly fed from this wonderful panel. Please join me in thanking so much Dr. Battaglia and Dr. Stewart.